So, what if calling your company a unicorn is actually a sign that you're just, I don't know, thinking way too small?
Yeah, which sounds crazy, right?
Yeah,
Because a $1 billion valuation has been the holy grail for so long.
exactly. I mean, for the last 2 decades, building a privately held startup and hitting that billion-dollar mark, that was the undisputed gold standard in tech.
It was the finish line.
Right. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a manifesto that basically argues the entire era of the unicorn is, well, it's officially obsolete.
It really is a fascinating, highly strategic document. It was literally published today, May 19th, 2026, on the NASN blog.
Right, by an author named Paramendra.
Yeah, and the piece is titled The Solara Vision Paradigm Shifts, Not Incremental Wins. And it lays out this blueprint that fundamentally challenges the whole vocabulary of ambition that we've grown so used to in the tech ecosystem.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you work in tech or finance or, even if you just track the broader shifts in global innovation, this is where the text completely upends the traditional playbook.
It really does. It introduces this totally new benchmark.
Right, called the Solara. And the core argument here is that we have to fundamentally kill the concept of the faster horse.
Yes, the Henry Ford analogy.
Exactly. The text states pretty boldly, the car was not a faster horse. The rocket was not a faster airplane. The airplane was not a faster car. So, I mean, looking at this, it seems like a Solara isn't defined by its monetary valuation at all, but by its blast radius, I guess, like an infrastructural leap. Am I reading that right?
You're absolutely reading that right. The blast radius really is the defining metric here. I mean, when a traditional startup succeeds, it basically just captures a lucrative slice of an existing market, right?
Like a really great coffee shop on a busy corner.
Exactly. But a Solara, by contrast, the author says it operates on a quantum leap. It redefines the category so completely that it sets a new baseline for how human effort is even organized.
Wow.
And the author is super deliberate in contrasting this with the venture capital darling, the unicorn.
Right, because it's not just a bigger unicorn.
No, not at all. It's not just a bigger, more expensive unicorn. It embodies a completely different genetic makeup. It's a mission so audacious and, frankly, systemic that it transcends conventional venture logic entirely.
Okay, wait, I want to pause on that phrase for a second. Transcends conventional venture logic. Because my immediate skeptical reaction to a founder claiming they transcend venture logic is just that, well, their project is way too capital intensive and way too risky for any rational investor to actually touch.
Which is a totally fair pushback.
Right. Like, how does the text define this distinction mechanically? Why doesn't a Solara just fit into a standard Sandhill Road pitch deck?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of traditional venture capital. They're inherently tied to predictable pattern recognition, right? And very rigid time horizons.
The dreaded fund life cycle.
Exactly. If you run a venture fund, you raise capital from limited partners, so pension funds, university endowments, people like that. And you typically have to promise them a massive return within a strict 10-year fund life cycle. That structural reality basically forces VCs to look for companies that can hit an IPO or get acquired within, 5 to 7 years.
So they need something fast.
Yeah, they need a software product that can capture 20% of an existing market, and they need it yesterday.
So the venture model inherently selects for incrementalism. It essentially selects for a highly efficient, faster horse, because a horse is a known market quantity, right? You can model the revenue of a faster horse on a spreadsheet.
You can project the customer acquisition costs and the lifetime value of a horse buyer perfectly.
Yeah.
But a Solara doesn't aim to capture a slice of an existing market. It aims to build an entirely new infrastructure that forces the rest of the world to adapt to it.
Which is terrifying for a standard VC.
Totally terrifying, because it requires looking past the immediate risk and recognizing that the systemic shift is actually the safest long-term bet. I mean, if you build the infrastructure for the next era of computing or energy, you create your own inevitability.
Wow, create your own inevitability.
Yeah, but you just cannot do that on a 5-year venture clock.
So it's basically the difference between, like I said earlier, opening a highly profitable coffee shop on a busy established street versus deciding you're going to, lay the concrete, build the plumbing, and construct an entirely new city, just trusting that the coffee shops will eventually pay you rent.
That's a great way to put it. The scale of capital and the timeline just require a completely different funding mechanism.
Right. And while that sounds great in theory, the author actually provides concrete historical proof that this model works, right? And that it's been kind of hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, they point to two canonical examples of this Solara DNA in action. SpaceX and NVIDIA.
Okay, let's break down the SpaceX example first, because I feel like it perfectly illustrates that friction with traditional capital we were just talking about. The text notes that SpaceX was founded without traditional VC backing because it was deemed too ambitious.
Oh yeah, in the early 2000s, pitching a private company to build reusable rockets, that was considered absolute financial suicide.
I mean, rightfully so.
Through a traditional lens, sure, the venture model couldn't map the timeline. And they definitely couldn't stomach the capital requirements of blowing up multiple rockets and testing before ever achieving orbit.
Right, VCs don't like paying for explosions.
Exactly. So the trajectory for SpaceX didn't change through incremental funding rounds like your standard seed, Series A, Series B.
Right.
It changed through a transformative partnership. NASA stepped in and provided billions in contracts.
And this introduces a concept that I think is crucial for anyone trying to build a massive project today, which is non-dilutive capital.
Yeah.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that for a second. Because if I'm a founder and I take traditional venture money, I'm selling equity, right?
Right.
I'm diluting my ownership, and usually I'm giving up board seats.
And with those board seats comes control over the company's direction. That's the kicker. If a founder takes VC money for a 20-year infrastructure project, the board is eventually going to step in. They'll demand a pivot to something more immediately profitable like, I don't know, enterprise software, and force a sale to satisfy their fund's life cycle.
Just to get their money out.
Exactly. But NASA's contracts provided non-dilutive capital. They didn't take equity. They didn't demand board seats. They essentially just said, look, we need a ride to the International Space Station, and we will pay you billions upon successful delivery.
That is such a massive difference. That structure actually protects the founder's vision.
It does.
It allowed SpaceX to absorb those catastrophic early failures because their primary funder wasn't looking for a quick exit. They were looking for a systemic capability.
And the result, as the text points out, was a fundamental alteration of the economics of leaving the planet. That is the blast radius of a Solara.
Which is incredible. But okay, the second historical example the text provides can transitions us from physical infrastructure to digital infrastructure.
Right, NVIDIA.
Yeah, the author argues that NVIDIA, which was born in the 1990s, was a Solara from its inception, that they didn't just chase modest improvements in traditional processing, but actually laid the architectural foundations for the modern AI revolution, decades before the market was even ready for it.
That's the claim, yeah.
But I kind of have to challenge the premise here. I mean,
Right.
did NVIDIA really know they were building the architecture for the 2026 artificial intelligence boom back in 1995?
You think it's survivorship bias?
Yeah, exactly. People were just trying to play better-looking video games back then. The skeptics might say this author is taking the Solara label and just retrofitting it onto a company that, frankly, got incredibly lucky. Lucky that their specialized gaming hardware turned out to be the exact mathematical engine required for neural networks.
It's a very strong argument that survivorship bias won, but the text frames NVIDIA's strategy around a very specific methodology. And the defining phrase they use is, you know the target. You engineer backward from.
You engineer backward from it. Okay.
Yeah. True Solaras operate like a moonshot.
Sure.
The destination is fixed by physics or systemic necessity, and the innovation is entirely in the reverse engineering required to get there, regardless of whether the broader market understands the destination yet.
So let's break down massively parallel processing, because that is the technological core of what NVIDIA engineered backward from.
Right.
Imagine a traditional central processing unit, right? A CPU. I like to think of it like a grocery store. A CPU is like having one incredibly fast, absolute genius-level cashier.
Good. I like this analogy.
They can scan items faster than humanly possible, but they are still processing that line sequentially, right? One item at a time.
And that sequential processing works perfectly for rendering a Word document or, calculating a spreadsheet.
Exactly. But NVIDIA realized that simulating a three-dimensional world like calculating how light bounces off a million different polygons on a screen simultaneously, it just could not be done sequentially.
The physics of the problem demanded a different architecture entirely.
Right, parallel processing, which is like opening 10,000 average speed checkout lanes at the exact same time.
So NVIDIA engineered backward from the necessity of parallel computing. They recognized that the future of computation, whether it was rendering a video game or eventually training a neural network on trillions of data points, would require massive simultaneity.
Right, they built the physical capacity for a future market to even exist.
They built the 10,000 checkout lanes before the grocery store even had customers.
Which is such a wild risk to take.
It is. They didn't react to an existing market demand for AI. They created the infrastructural tracks and basically just waited for the train of deep learning to arrive in the 2010s.
Wow.
That is the absolute essence of a Solara. It is the capacity to hold a systemic vision for decades, irrespective of the immediate market feedback.
Okay, so SpaceX proves this works for physical infrastructure. NVIDIA proves it works for digital architecture, which brings us to the present day. If those were the Solara missions of the past, kind of setting these massive baselines, what carries that DNA right now in 2026?
Well, the author points to specific, highly ambitious projects, and I have to say, the framing they use is incredibly grand.
Yeah, let's talk about that scale.
The scope of the document truly expands here. The author points to initiatives operating under names like Precigenetics and Himalayan Compute.
Himalayan Compute, just the name sounds massive.
It does. And to really understand the gravity of these projects, we have to look at the striking, almost prophetic opening line of this manifesto.
Oh, right, the scripture line.
Exactly. It reads, "The impending age of abundance was prophesied in the scriptures thousands of years ago."
I mean, to drop ancient scripture into a Silicon Valley tech manifesto, that immediately signals to the reader that we are dealing with a thinker who views technological progress through a lens of historical, almost epical destiny, right?
Oh, absolutely. We aren't talking about optimizing like a supply chain software tool here. We are talking about technology as the actual mechanism delivering this age of abundance.
And viewing technology through that lens, it has to fundamentally change how you approach scale and coordination. If your goal is literally planetary abundance, you cannot rely on a standard Series A funding round.
You really can't. Which brings us to the specific mechanics of Himalayan Compute. The text states that this project engages sovereign governments and sovereign wealth funds from the very outset.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, they operate at an intersection where national interests and transformative technology basically converge.
We really need to unpack what engaging a sovereign wealth fund actually means for the tech ecosystem. Because if you're a founder, the traditional path is to go pitch private venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road.
Right.
But this text is suggesting bypassing that entirely and going straight to national treasuries.
Which is a massive paradigm shift.
Totally. I mean, a sovereign wealth fund is essentially a nation's savings account. They don't measure returns in 5-year fund life cycles like VCs do. They measure returns in generations.
Exactly. And the term the text introduces here is sovereign scale projects. The argument is that the most significant technological visions in our current era, like massive compute clusters, fundamental genomic research, global energy grids, they increasingly require coordinated capital and aligned stakeholders from day one.
Because the stuff is just too big now.
Yes, the compounding rate of technology means the challenges and the opportunities are simply too large for fragmented, VC-funded efforts to handle.
It requires the gravity of a nation state. Like,
Right.
if you are trying to build something that dictates the future of artificial intelligence computation, you aren't just building a sauce product anymore.
No, you're building national security infrastructure.
Exactly. You are building the 21st century equivalent of the electrical grid.
And the text references massive alliances to illustrate this scale. For example, they mention a headline, Condor Galaxy India. India and UAE team up on compute.
Right. And just to be clear for listening, we're not taking any political sides here or endorsing any specific geopolitical moves. We're just looking at the sheer economic and technological scale of these alliances as they're presented in the text.
Right. The focus here isn't geopolitical posturing at all. It's about the sheer force required to manifest a Solara. A sovereign wealth fund aligns technological breakthroughs with national infrastructure.
Because they can provide things VCs can't.
Exactly. They can provide the actual land, the power grid priority, and that multi-decade capital horizon that a venture firm legally cannot provide.
So we have established the absolute ceiling of the Solara concept. We're talking space exploration, the foundation of AI hardware, nation-states building massive compute clusters.
The biggest of the big.
But then the text executes this fascinating pivot. Out of all the applications of artificial intelligence currently in development, the author identifies a surprisingly ubiquitous, almost mundane sector as the premier Solara opportunity today.
Yeah, it's a bit of a whiplash.
They point to marketing.
The juxtaposition is totally intentional, though. Moving from planetary scale infrastructure and ancient prophecy straight into the mechanics of marketing, it feels jarring. But the author is super methodical in their reasoning.
Right.
The text notes that multiple analyses have identified marketing as the #1 use case for AI's transformative power.
And if we really pressure test that claim against the definition of a Solara, the logic actually holds up.
It really does.
Because a Solara sets a new baseline for scale and impact. And what touches every single business on Earth, regardless of industry or geography or what product they sell, the need to acquire and retain customers.
It's the circulatory system of global commerce.
Exactly. If you can fundamentally reinvent that process using AI, your total addressable market isn't just some niche demographic, it is the entirety of the global economy.
The potential value is practically limitless. But the text identifies a really critical bottleneck.
And what's that?
The current state of AI in marketing is severely fragmented.
Right.
We have this transformative technological capacity, but right now it's trapped in isolated silos.
Let's talk about those silos.
Sure, the author lists the specific segments currently defining the industry. You've got personalization, content generation, analytics, customer journey optimization, and creative testing. And there are hundreds of highly capable, very smart teams attacking these specific pieces individually.
Right. Let's visualize what this fragmentation actually looks like for a business trying to use these tools right now. It's like trying to invent the modern automobile, but the industry consists of isolated geniuses operating in separate garages scattered all across the country.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like one startup has engineered a flawless, completely frictionless steering wheel. Another startup, entirely disconnected from the first one, has built an incredibly efficient internal combustion engine.
And a third one has synthesized indestructible tires.
Exactly. Individually, the engineering is absolutely brilliant.
But they are selling their parts separately.
Yes. So the business owner, the consumer who actually needs the vehicle, is left buying a highly optimized steering wheel and just sitting in their driveway. No one has built the actual car.
And the friction in the current marketing stack is massive because of this. You have an AI tool that generates brilliant email copy.
Yeah, but it doesn't talk seamlessly with the AI analyzing your customer retention data.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
neither of them communicates with the AI optimizing your real-time ad spend.
So because they are separate companies with separate data structures, the value of that data degrades every single time it has to cross from one silo to another. You don't have a systemic solution at all. You just have a collection of disjointed tools.
And the author recognized this latent value trap by analyzing a very specific subset of the startup ecosystem.
Right, the Y Combinator angle.
Yes. The text points out that they reviewed roughly 20 graduates from Y Combinator, which is Silicon Valley's most notoriously grueling startup accelerator.
It's intense.
Very intense. And they noticed a striking pattern among these 20. Each of these startups excels in one vital, specific slice of the marketing stack.
So they literally are the perfect steering wheel, the perfect engine, the perfect tires.
Exactly. The text explicitly states, individually they are capable startups. Collectively, they represent the raw materials for something far greater.
Which really transitions the manifesto from a philosophical observation into a highly specific battle plan.
Yes, the master plan.
The author proposes what they call the Grand Solara merger. And the argument here is that trying to build the entire car organically, where one startup tries to slowly build the features of the other 19 over time, is basically a guaranteed failure.
Because technology compounds way too rapidly for that. By the time you build the engine to match your steering wheel, the market has moved on to hovercrafts.
Exactly. So the proposed solution is a respectful structural merger of these 20 YC startups into a single integrated AI marketing powerhouse.
The vision is to create an entity that can orchestrate the entire customer lifecycle with unprecedented intelligence, completely eliminating the friction of that siloed data we were talking about.
And the author gives this concept a very specific name: cooperation capitalism.
Cooperation capitalism, it sounds almost utopian.
It does, and we have to differentiate cooperation capitalism from what the finance world traditionally calls a corporate roll-up.
Oh, totally different things.
Right, because if a private equity firm buys 20 marketing startups, their playbook is entirely mathematically driven.
Right, they slash overhead, they fire redundant engineering staff, they mash the sales teams together, and they basically just squeeze out a better profit margin based on economies of scale.
Yeah, it is entirely financially engineered, often at the direct expense of product innovation. The product usually gets worse.
But the text is very careful to distinguish the Solara approach from that. It says, quote, "This would not be a traditional roll-up or buyout driven by financial engineering."
So what is it then?
Cooperation capitalism is mission-driven. It's about aligning shared vision and organizational integration to create a systemic capability that literally none of the 20 could achieve alone. It is about compounding innovation, not just optimizing costs.
Okay, I have to step in here and challenge the human element of this proposal. Because the philosophy of compounding innovation sounds great on paper, but let's look at the psychology of the actual people involved here.
The founders.
Yes, we are talking about 20 founders who survived Y Combinator. The author actually calls YC Paul Graham's ramen noodle university for a reason.
It is an absolute crucible.
It is. It produces hyper-competitive type A individuals who have basically bled to build their specific piece of the puzzle. And right now, they are all currently the CEO of their own venture-backed company.
Right, they're sitting at the top of their own little mountains.
Exactly. So how on earth do you convince 20 alpha founders to check their egos at the door, give up their CEO titles, and merge their life's work? I mean, isn't cooperation capitalism kind of an oxymoron in a Silicon Valley culture built entirely on hyper-individualism and zero-sum competition?
It's the most significant structural hurdle to the entire thesis, frankly. But the author addresses this psychological barrier directly, and they kind of flip the assumption on its head.
How so?
The argument is that surviving that exact crucible Y Combinator is precisely what makes this massive coordination possible in the first place.
Wait, really? It makes it more possible?
The author says it creates a unique cultural advantage.
Walk me through that psychology. How does surviving a hyper-competitive accelerator make them more likely to cooperate with each other?
Because it forges a shared fundamental operating language. These founders aren't corporate bureaucrats protecting fiefdoms. They are builders who deeply, deeply respect competence and velocity. They understand rapid iteration. They understand building under immense existential pressure. And the author argues that if you present a grand Solara Vision, like a trillion-dollar moonshot that just completely dwarfs their individual ambitions, that shared language makes them the only group capable of executing such a complex integration.
Oh, I see. It's like an Avengers model.
Exactly.
You take a group of solitary heroes, all accustomed to being the main character, and you show them a threat or an opportunity, an alien invasion, or in this case, a trillion-dollar market void that is so massive it physically requires them to team up. It demands a crisp, undeniable mission to align their egos.
And the text notes that the Solara mindset favors respectful integration over zero-sum competition. It relies on the founders recognizing that the greatest value is created by orchestrating proven pieces, rather than wasting years trying to invent every single component in isolation while the market just passes them by.
Right. Okay, the psychological alignment makes a certain kind of sense if the vision is grand enough. But we have to look at the cold, hard math here.
Yes, let's look at the numbers.
Because is this just a utopian dream of 20 founders holding hands around a campfire, or does the financial architecture actually support this?
The text actually lays out the mathematics of what it calls the trillion-dollar sun in very specific terms.
Let's break that down.
So this financial blueprint is where the theoretical Solara concept meets structural reality. The text asks us to imagine a scenario with these 20 companies. Let's assume each one has raised approximately $2 million in seed capital.
Okay.
And they're sitting at a standard $10 million valuation.
Simple arithmetic. If we keep them isolated and just sum their valuations on a spreadsheet, 20 companies times $10 million each equals $200 million in collective enterprise value.
Right. But the author's core hypothesis is that the moment you execute this merger, properly uniting the technology, pooling the data lakes, integrating the go-to-market strategies, something dramatic happens to that valuation.
Dramatic how?
The text states the combined entity would immediately re-rate toward $500 million or more.
Okay, let's dissect that $300 million jump. Because from a purely structural standpoint, how does putting 20 companies under one corporate umbrella magically create $300 million in enterprise value out of thin air? I mean, is that just financial alchemy? Or is there a mechanical reason the market actually assigns a higher multiple to a unified platform?
It's not alchemy at all. It's entirely mechanical. And it comes down to the metrics that drive SaaS valuations.
Which are?
Customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, and defensibility. Think about it. When these 20 companies operate separately, they are spending massive amounts of capital fighting each other for the attention of the exact same chief marketing officers.
Oh, right. They have 20 different disjointed sales teams trying to sell single features.
Which means their customer acquisition cost is astronomically high.
And their churn rate is likely high as well, right? Because a CMO can easily rip out a single feature tool and replace it with a cheaper one next month.
Exactly. There is no deep moat.
But when you unify them,
Precisely the opposite happens. When the AI that writes the email directly feeds data to the AI analyzing the purchase history, which directly informs the AI optimizing the ad spend, the value of that closed-loop data compounds exponentially.
right, because it's learning from the entire ecosystem.
Yes. You aren't just lowering the acquisition cost by cross-selling a unified platform. You are drastically increasing the lifetime value of the customer because the system becomes way too integral to rip out.
So the market looks at that unified data ecosystem and says, this isn't a collection of easily replaceable features anymore. This is the central nervous system of a brand's revenue.
And the market pays a massive premium for that defensibility. The re-rating to $500 million just reflects that transition from vulnerable features to a systemic defensible platform.
Wow.
And the author argues that $500 million is merely the starting line. Once unified, this entity is positioned on a, quote, credible trajectory toward $1 trillion in long-term value over a decade.
The trillion-dollar sun.
Yeah.
And, when you consider they are targeting the circulatory system of global commerce, the sheer scale of the addressable market actually makes that trillion-dollar trajectory mathematically viable.
It does.
But achieving that requires execution, which brings us to what I think is the most fascinating number in this entire manifesto, the cost of actually orchestrating this merger.
The down payment.
Yes. The text outlines a specific down payment required to execute this integration. To fund the initial legal structure, the administrative alignment, and the unified leadership framework, the author proposes a cost of $30,000 per company.
Totaling $600,000.
Wait, $600,000 to orchestrate a $300 million value jump? How does the math on that down payment actually pencil out? It seems disproportionately tiny compared to the scale of the ambition.
It does seem small until you analyze what that $600,000 is actually purchasing. The text notes, quote, the details matter less than the principle. Start with the end in mind.
Okay.
That money is not being used to build the technology.
Right.
The raw materials, the algorithms, the machine learning models, the specialized engineering talent that has already been funded by the initial $40 million in aggregate seed capital those 20 startups raised.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. So that $600,000 isn't buying the bricks and the steel.
No.
It's paying for the architect's blueprints, the city construction permits, and the project manager required to assemble the materials that are already sitting on the lot. It's literally just the administrative solvent required to bind them together.
Beautifully put. And it highlights a crucial shift in the Solara era. The primary barrier to building a category-defining company isn't technological capability anymore.
Right.
And it isn't even access to massive capital for research and development. The building blocks already exist. The barrier is entirely structural.
The barrier is courage and orchestration. I mean, in the old venture model, the archetype of the founder was the lone genius coding a new algorithm in a basement.
The hacker in the hoodie.
Exactly. But the Solara model reframes the supreme skill of the modern tech leader as that of a grand conductor. You don't need to invent a new violin or teach the trumpet player how to play. You just need the vision to bring 20 virtuoso musicians onto the exact same stage and the leadership to get them to play the exact same symphony.
As the text says, define the Solara destination clearly, then align incentives and organizations to reach it. The true value creation in 2026 lies in orchestrating proven pieces into a system vastly greater than the sum of its parts.
Wow.
And if we zoom out from this specific proposal for AI marketing, we can see this exact orchestration philosophy reflected across the broader ecosystem of the author's work.
Let's talk about that peripheral data surrounding this text because it provides essential context for how this author actually views the world.
Right.
This manifesto doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? The Netizen blog is this massive interconnected web of ideas. We see references to upcoming works like physical AWS, how the logistics cloud will reshape global commerce, and agentic AI set to explode in 2026.
And we even see philosophical works like Calciism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance.
It is a staggering breadth of focus. I mean, the author seamlessly blends deep philosophical frameworks with hardcore 0 to 1 Silicon Valley structural mechanics.
Yeah, it's very unique.
But what does this vast, seemingly disparate web of topics tell us about how we need to process information in 2026? Because historically, the advice to founders and investors was always to niche down, right? Be the absolute expert in one highly specific vertical.
Well, that niche strategy works in an era of incrementalism.
Okay.
But the text explicitly states incrementalism belongs to the past. Markets move too fast, technology compounds too rapidly.
Right.
When artificial intelligence is compounding at its current rate, the boundaries between disciplines just collapse entirely. You cannot understand the future of commerce by only looking at software.
The concept of physical AWS is a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
If you want to bring the on-demand, infinitely scalable nature of cloud computing to physical global logistics, you can't just be a software engineer. You have to understand autonomous robotics, international supply chain dynamics, and urban infrastructure, all simultaneously.
The author's wide-ranging focus basically proves the core thesis of the Solara. The companies that will define the next era will rarely be the obvious linear extensions of yesterday's winners.
They will leap to entirely new planes.
Yes, they will sit at the intersection of converging technologies. The Solara mindset rejects vague aspirations and demands a systemic mission precisely because a massive mission is the only thing large enough to encompass all these converging tools.
That makes total sense, because if you are only monitoring what your direct legacy competitor is doing, you're basically already dead.
Yep.
You are pouring capital into breeding a slightly faster horse, completely unaware that someone in a completely different industry is engineering a rocket that will make the whole concept of a horse obsolete.
And the raw materials for the age of abundance, the AI agents, the sovereign compute clusters, the genomic data sets, they already exist. As the text notes, they are sitting in garages, accelerators, and early-stage labs right now. The era of isolation is ending, and the era of orchestration is beginning.
Which is such a powerful thought. And that brings us to the close of this incredibly dense, highly provocative deep dive. Let's just trace the arc of the paradigm shift we've unpacked today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started with the death of the unicorn. The realization that building a billion-dollar single-feature software company is no longer the ultimate finish line. It has been replaced by the Solara, a quantum leap that forces systemic adaptation.
And then we examined the historical DNA of this shift. We saw how SpaceX rejected traditional diluted venture capital in favor of sovereign partnerships just to secure the 20-year timeline needed to change orbital economics entirely.
Right. And we analyzed how NVIDIA engineered backward, building the massive parallel processing architecture required for AI decades before the market even recognized the need.
We tracked that Solara DNA straight into the present, looking at massive sovereign-scale projects like Himalayan compute that are aligning national wealth with transformative technology.
And then we brought it right down to the operational level, examining the ultimate opportunity in the fragmented world of AI marketing.
We dissected the blueprint for cooperation capitalism, the structural, psychological, and financial mechanics of taking 20 battle-tested Y Combinator startups and using a highly leveraged $600,000 catalyst to orchestrate a $300 million immediate re-rating, all setting the stage for a $1 trillion unified platform.
It really is a masterclass in seeing the systemic forest instead of just the isolated trees. So if you are listening to this right now, whether you are an investor evaluating where to deploy your capital, a founder navigating a pivot, or simply someone trying to make sense of how rapidly the technological ground is shifting beneath our feet, how does this framework actually change your approach?
I think the immediate takeaway for you listening is to elevate your evaluation criteria. Stop analyzing opportunities based purely on whether they are a slightly more efficient version of the status quo.
Stop looking for the faster horse.
Exactly. Look for the paradigm leaps. Look for the teams and the structures that are engineering backward from a clear, undeniable future destination, regardless of whether traditional capital markets have recognized that destination yet.
And that leads me to a final, lingering thought for you to carry forward today. We've spent this entire discussion dissecting the author's specific vision for merging 20 AI marketing startups. But the underlying principle here, that the greatest value in 2026 is created by orchestrating proven pieces rather than inventing from scratch in isolation, that applies far beyond marketing.
Absolutely.
So take a hard look at your own industry today, whether you are in healthcare, global logistics, education, or decentralized finance. Look past the massive established legacy players. Look at the edges of your ecosystem. What brilliant, highly capable, but completely fragmented building blocks are currently sitting in isolation?
Who has engineered the perfect engine? And who has built the flawless steering wheel.
Exactly. And more importantly, are they just sitting there waiting for someone with the vision, the alignment, and the structural courage to assemble them into a grand Solara Vision? The raw materials are ready. The only question is whether you are going to help assemble the rocket or if you are going to just stay in the stable. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Solara Vision. We will catch you next time.